In these problems, we're being asked to simplify some complicated-looking trig expressions. For example, here we have the cosine squared x times sine x plus sine cubed x. And we're supposed to use algebra and some knowledge of trig identities to bring that all down to just one trig function. So how are we going to go about this? Well, we're going to look for these patterns that we see here. These are the trigonometric identities. And some of these you know already. You know, for example, that the cosecant is 1 over the sine. That also means that the sine is 1 over the cosecant. They're reciprocals of each other. That's why these are called reciprocal identities. And the same is true for cosine and secant and tangent and cotangent. They're reciprocals of each other. And then you also know how tangent and cotangent are defined. Tangent is the sine over the cosine, and the cotangent is the cosine over the sine. That's going to come in handy as well. These are the ones right here that might be new to you. These are the Pythagorean identities. The first one says that the sine squared plus the cosine squared equals 1, the number 1. That's going to come in really handy. And then these others are sort of forms of this. You can arrive at these by taking this first one and manipulating it with algebra a little bit. So we've got tangent squared plus 1 equals the secant squared, and the cotangent squared plus 1 equals the cosecant squared. So we want to keep our eyes out for patterns like this. Let's try with this first one. At first, it might not be clear what you can do to make progress on this one, but there are two terms here, this first term, then this sine cubed term, and there's a sine x in each of those terms. So I could start by factoring that out. If I do that, I'm going to get sine x on the outside, and the first term then is just going to be the cosine squared of x, and the second term is going to be the sine squared of x. And this is something we should be looking out for right here. The sine squared plus the cosine squared equals 1. So this cosine squared plus sine squared, doesn't matter what order they're in, this just equals 1. So this is actually sine x times 1, or just sine of x. And that is our answer. All right, let's try another one. Here we have the cotangent times the tangent. Well, how do we handle that? When in doubt, I would say convert everything to sine and cosine. So the cotangent is the cosine over the sine. So this is cosine x over sine x. And the tangent is the sine over the cosine. So this is sine x over cosine x. And what you should notice now is everything cancels. And really, that would all just come out to 1. When everything cancels, what you have left over is 1. And maybe you could have seen that right away without converting to sine and cosine, because you know the cotangent and the tangent are reciprocals of each other. And if you multiply reciprocals, you get the number 1. All right. Let's try a slightly harder one. This looks tricky. The secant times the cosine equals, or over the tangent. So I think I'm going to convert this all to sine and cosine. So what's the secant? The secant is 1 over the cosine. So 1 over the cosine. Oh, and then we have that multiplied by the cosine. And then that all goes over the tangent, which is the sine. I suppose I should have my x's in here. Over the cosine. Okay, well, the cosines here are going to cancel. So what I get is 1 over the sine x over cosine x, or 1 over the tangent. And when you have 1 over something and it's a fraction, you can just take the reciprocal of it. That's what it means. 1 over is the reciprocal. So this is cosine x over sine x, and that is the cotangent of x. All right, last one here. We've got the secant of x over the cosecant of x. So let me do it over here where I have a little more room. So the secant is 1 over the cosine. So 1 over the cosine of x over the cosecant, which is 1 over the sine of x. And I think what I'm going to do here is just multiply this fraction by sine x over sine x. Anything over itself is 1, so I'm just multiplying this fraction by 1. It's easy to get confused here with the fractions. This you can think of in each of these fractions is the sign going on top, multiplying on top. So on top here, we have the sine x over the cosine when you do the multiplication. And on the bottom, you have sine x over sine x. Well, that's just going to cancel out, leaving 1. So we have the sine x over the cosine x over 1. Well, that over 1 doesn't really matter anymore. It's just sine x over cosine x. And that, of course, is the tangent. So the answer here is the tangent of x. So that is how to simplify some trigonometric expressions using the trigonometric identities.